I am going to shoot from the hip and just tell you that in one of the last videos, one of the commenters challenged me, like, you don't know anything. You're just so ignorant. So why don't you read some Jacques Derrida and you will get everything straight in your mind. Now here's the challenge. I've mentioned that language is irreducible, and I don't mean that it cannot be simplified. I don't mean that two people that already have language can't dumb down a language and create a very minimalistic type of language where they could communicate in some kind of weird way. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about language cannot be formed from non-language. You can't, in the evolutionary spectrum, start from zero and build a language. It is not logical. It is not rational. There's no way to do it. Well, anyway, this person was explaining to me that Foucault and some of these other guys, that they have already explained how language could pop up. So I was like, man, an area I have actually been asking people about this, like, can you give me some information on this? And all of a sudden somebody's handing me some information. I'm like, man, here's a category of study I get to jump into, something I don't know about. And so I immediately dove in, and as always, being a Christian, there's just no foundation for Derrida to stand upon. It just starts crumbling from the very beginning. But let's talk about it. So one of the first things that someone mentioned, and I think this was at Plato Philosophy or whatnot.com, is that there is this exchange between form and content. We actually have, in the Western mindset, we have put so much focus on content that we have made it override the form. Okay, so basically, words are form, and then content is the meaning. And so us Westerners and our Western mindset always thinks that meaning is what's really solid, that there's truth and absolutes and objectives, but there's really not. And then there's the form that represents those things, but there's not really those things. And so then Derrida, what he did was try to flip these and try to make form content and content form. And I know he's using a ton of different words for this, but none of this works. And so to make sure that I was getting it, I watched a couple of, some of the very first videos that pop up about Derrida. And they go into great lengths that Derrida was the one who invented deconstruction. And you hear this all the time now. There are people that are in religion like, I'm deconstructing my religion, or I'm deconstructing my faith. And then they talk about the binary system of words, and you hear binary, non-binary terms today, etc. And so thank you for exposing me to where some of this nonsense is coming from. But one of the things that he was mentioning is that words don't necessarily have meaning. They don't have an absolute meaning. And one of the ways that he began to explain this, or the person trying to explain Derrida was explaining it, was that Derrida was trying to show that words don't necessarily have opposites, but they have counterparts and they have cycles. So he was like, when we talk about culture, which would be over here on this side of the equation, it's not the same as nature. And so culture talks about what nature is, but without nature, culture doesn't exist. But you've never talked about nature without culture, because if you were just hanging out in nature, then it's so symbiotic, it's so tied to it. So another example, and maybe one that makes it more clear, we talk about the difference between a man and a woman. When you begin to say, what is a man? Well, we know he's different from a woman, and not just, anatomically different, but what are the differences? We see there's some physical difference, but you get into a position of complexity that to describe what maleness is, it's just the opposite of femaleness. So they're inexplicably tied together, and things are way more complicated than we ever thought. But then I got down to the root of these things. He was like, we're trying to exchange form and content. And he was actually expressing that all perceived meaning in life, the only place that meaning ever came from was experience. And experience is just a whole bunch of form. And so the idea of anything having meaning comes from form. Well, the reason that we believe in meaning and actual meaning is because of the simple thing of lies. At some point in our life, someone has lied to us, and we saw the difference between reality and non-reality. We saw a difference between truth and non-truth, and we're like, whoa, there's a difference. And so that is when it became important to us to go, hey, I want to hang on to what is important in life and what is true and what is real. And I'm sure it's way more complicated than that on the real spectrum of how we did this. But the thing that just really gave it away was when one of the videos was summarizing, was like, all words are subjective. And one of the ways that Derrida began to undermine Greek thinking and Platonic thinking and all this kind of stuff was examining words by the words themselves. But we don't examine words just by the words themselves. We examine words by their meaning and by their context. And we know there's an actual meaning behind words, or we wouldn't try to unexplain things with meanings. But there was a coy little trick that Derrida liked to throw out there. And here's this trick. He would explain what deconstruction was, and that all words are subjective. You know, a word has some of the meaning, but it's always linked to other meanings. So like words have just kind of evolved and piggybacked on top of each other. And so the meaning that you know might not be the meaning that I know. And so I can't ever quite know what you are saying, because words are relative. All words are subjective. But even stating that, what you're doing is you're saying all words are subjective, and this gets us back to truth. You believe in truth, and if you believe something is true, that all words are subjective, then you believe in absolute truth, and if you believe in absolute truth, then you believe that words do have meanings that absolutely apply, or it absolutely doesn't apply, or it kind of applies in an absolute sense. But you can't get away from words not being based in reality or based in truth. So as soon as the cat was out of the bag when somebody said all words are subjective, you're trying to force non-meaning onto all words. And this just doesn't work. So all of this brings us back to the point that language cannot be created from nothing. The communicator and the receiver would both have to be aware that communication could happen. They would have to already be primed for it to happen. And if adaptation was any part of the process, like it just wouldn't work. And I'm going to give a reason that another reason that couldn't work. Do you know what happens to human beings when they are trying to express what they think or feel inside to another human being in our advanced state? We're not advanced. We've actually gone downhill. But in the evolutionary mindset, we've advanced. And do you know what happens in our advanced state when we can't communicate? We get frustrated, and we repeat ourselves, and we say things again, and we get angry, and we yell, and we fight. So can you imagine... This is humorous. Can you imagine primitive humans trying to eke out a language? Huh? There would be slaughtering, death, killing, destruction before any language could form. So I gotcha. I have you cold. God was the giver of language, and he gave it to us in the Garden of Eden when he created man and woman. And you now have the joy of being able to communicate with other people if you so chose, because God gave us language. You might not like it. You might not like it, but you don't have any alternatives that work.